Hello, welcome to our online discussion of February the 5th, 2016. So my name is Christian Debré and this is Amy Hasbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet.
Hello.
And Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability right opposition to assisted suicide and euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminate against people with disabilities. Today's topics: the latest call for assisted suicide in Canada, Toujours Vivant Not Dead Yet, testimony to Parliament's Special Joint Committee on Physician Aid in Dying. So I give the voice to Amy.
Thank you.
For our discussion.
Okay, the latest calls or candidates for assisted suicide in Canada. Two recent news stories have called attention to the kinds of assisted suicide cases that are likely to arise when the practice becomes legal. Neither of them concern people with terminal illness. So the people who promote assisted suicide say it's not really suicide because these people are at the end of life.
Yeah, that's what they say each time.
Right, exactly. But both of these people are not at the end of life at all.
Oops.
Oops. The other kind of not at the end, the other kind of end of life, the kind where you're in the middle of life, and as opposed to being at the end. On January 21st, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation reported on a Winnipeg man who is seeking assisted suicide because his medical condition will likely cause him to need a wheelchair in the near future.
Likely cause in the near future. So you want to suicide yourself because somewhere in a time you may become disabled.
Right. So it's not clear that it's not absolutely certain he'll become disabled, and it isn't happening now, but he wants to be sure that he can have assisted suicide when that happens, if it happens.
So he asked for suicide because he may become disabled.
Right.
It's not supposed to be for that
right.
use.
Well, the court decision said that it can be for disabled people, but it's supposed to be, they're supposed to have substantial suffering, and he's not talking about that. In response, Alan Mankiewicz, chair of the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities, said this situation points out society's view that it's better to be dead than disabled. And that's certainly how this guy seems to think.
This is a social standard discrimination against people with disability.
Right. So he's afraid he's going to become disabled, and he would rather be dead than be disabled. That's what he's saying.
Which for most people disabled, it's not true at all.
Right. People, once they become disabled, they have to go through a period of grieving, and then they adjust to having their disability. Then they realize that life isn't over, that they still have a fine life to lead.
Yeah.
Then this week, the CBC reported on a woman from Winnipeg who has treatment-resistant depression and wants an assisted suicide. Now, I know what it's like to have treatment-resistant depression.
You suffer from it.
Yeah, besides being legally blind, I have treatment-resistant depression, and I know that that's pretty awful, and it's pretty hard to live with at times. But I also know that,
life's still worth living.
Life's still worth living. But the other thing is, if I feel like I'm suicidal, I want society to be there to say, no, don't kill yourself. That's what I want society to do. Under the Supreme Court's ruling extending the deadline for Parliament to pass an assisted suicide law, these people could go before a judge for an exemption to the criminal prohibition and get permission for an assisted suicide.
Right now, it is their right.
Right.
Already.
They could do that. There is no indication in the CBC reports if either person intended to do so. So they have that right now.
They ask for, but they doesn't do the procedure.
Right, exactly. They're saying, I want assisted suicide, but they don't actually want to go through with what's necessary to get it. So, and the other thing that's frustrating about this is they're saying, I want assisted suicide, and the CBC is reporting on this. And the media are not supposed to report on suicides because that everybody knows that tends to increase the suicide rate. Yeah. So what is the CBC doing reporting on these people who are asking for assisted suicide, who can actually get it by going before a judge, but they're not doing that. So, and that's especially true this week, which is Quebec's Suicide Prevention Week. It seems a little bizarre to me.
And this is supposed to be all suicide.
Right, exactly. Not just
only certain kind of suicide.
Right. Not just suicide of people with disabilities or suicide of people who are
when it will be people
illnesses.
with big nose or big beard like me.
Right. It does not appear that either of these people has a disability that makes him or her unable to commit suicide without help. So we don't know everything about these people, but from what the articles say, it doesn't seem like these people are unable to commit suicide without help. And when the Supreme Court ruled, they said that the reason they're allowing assisted suicide is because some people might be deprived of life if they have to commit suicide before they're ready to die.
So if you are able to commit suicide by yourself, you should not apply for the law.
Right. It should be only for people who can't commit suicide but on their own. Okay. If these people are simply looking for an easier way to commit suicide and society gives it to them, what will that do to our efforts to prevent suicide? And I think that's a really important question.
It's a really important question. We have to answer ourselves what's happening next.
Right. Because, a lot of people say it's for people who are dying or, have very severe physical disabilities. But the person who's depressed doesn't have a physical disability as far as we know. And, so what does that say about our suicide prevention efforts? What does that mean? Are we really giving up on trying to prevent suicides? It's hard to say.
If it is, the government have to say to us, okay, guys, free for all, go.
Right.
At least we will know for what party we will have to vote.
Right. The government can
voting.
stop spending money on suicide prevention efforts and just
to be logical.
Right, exactly. I mean, why waste money if they're just going to help other people commit suicide? Okay, Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet's testimony to Parliament's Special Joint Committee on Physician Aid in Dying. TVNDY submitted testimony to the committee despite not being invited to testify in person.
And it is a little bit suspect because we are a project of CCD, which addressed the end-of-life practices. CCD was invited, but not us.
Right, and there were an awful lot of groups that were not invited, but then again, there was Dying with Dignity that appeared several times before the committee, so it's a little funny. And from what I heard, the people on the committee basically said they didn't want to hear from people who were opposed because they wanted to hear practical suggestions on how to implement it.
Which we do.
Which we provided, and which
Okay.
the other groups who were opposed were providing as well, but apparently they didn't want to hear our suggestions.
To be democratic, we need to shock the idea so the way the lights come out. Okay, and
We
if
need
you
to, what is that?
in French is choc des idées, jaillit la lumière. When you hit two ideas, different ideas, opposite ideas,
Oh, yeah.
from one to another, the justice, the right idea goes out. Okay,
Right.
But if you don't invite the opposition, there is no shock, no fighting, so there is no right things going out.
Right, right. Both ideas aren't heard. Both sides aren't heard, and so the truth doesn't come out.
No.
And the other thing is that, and we talked a little bit about this last week, the court decision said that they wanted to have a well-considered and carefully written law, but they're not giving enough time to do that. So they've only had 2 weeks of hearings, and then the group is going to have to spend 3 weeks writing legislation after that. So
it's a matter of life or death.
Right.
And we don't take time to address it.
Right,
properly.
exactly. And they're not hearing from half of the people who are interested. Hopefully they'll read what we wrote, but I'll point out later, we don't really expect them to. Our testimony offered extensive safeguards and very specific steps for determining eligibility and approving assisted suicide before the fact.
Yeah, before
the person dies.
If you do after it's impossible to say, oh, we doing wrong, so we try to take you back to life.
Right.
Try it, why?
Right. It
Try
doesn't
it.
work. Right. And most of the proposals that have come out are pretty relaxed about what happens before the fact. So that's why we had a lot of very specific steps before the fact.
Logical step.
Right. Our system would keep treating physicians out of the decision-making process.
Which is logical because doctors are supposed to care, not to kill.
Right, exactly. And
It's a basic thing.
Right. It keeps them from being put in a difficult position, and it gets rid of the need to have doctors be able to exempt themselves and that sort of thing. It also includes a case coordinator to guide the person through the application process so that volunteers from assisted suicide promotion groups will no longer have a place in encouraging the person to die. So in some places, people from Dying with Dignity or other similar groups like Compassion and Choices have been charged with helping the person die rather than
just a little bit pillow over the
right,
face.
putting the pillow over the
bit.
face at the end, or holding the person's hands so they don't rip off the plastic bag or something like that. And there have been some convictions and some, acquittals, but the point is that these people are interfering with the process rather than just being a helper. So if we have a person who's employed by the government who works to help by giving information, not by helping the person kill themselves.
Basically a technician.
Yeah, the case coordinator would help the person get all the information that's necessary, help the person get services if they need them. So instead of just helping on one side, the side about wanting to die, the person would help and get services so the person could continue to live. We offered definitions for key terms that used objective standards.
And definition is a weakness in a lot of those texts. From the court, from the government, different government, there's always weak in definition. Right.
So some of the definitions are so subjective that they're just self-referential, like saying that intolerable suffering is suffering that the person can't tolerate. So we used some objective standards. So instead of saying intolerable suffering not only means that suffering a person can't tolerate, but it also means physical pain and psychological or existential distress that makes the person unable to perform activities of daily living. And I pulled that last part, that objective standard, from a pain scale. And it's the highest level on the pain scale. 7 through 10 on the pain scale means you can't do activities of daily living. That's a measurable standard. And so I figured if we include that in suffering, then we know what a measurable standard is and what suffering is. Only assisted suicide and not euthanasia would be allowed under our proposal. And the reason is that there's a difference between when a person takes the act themselves that causes their own death versus somebody else doing the act. And if you think about a person sitting there with a button in their hand, and they can think about it as long as they want, and they can sit with that button in their hand for hours and hours and hours, and they can think about it, and if all of a sudden they decide, nope, I don't want to do it, and they just drop that little thing, that's their choice. Whereas if it's a euthanasia, somebody else has the button in their hand, and they're the one that pushes the button that injects the poison.
Yeah, and there is more than one way to push the button. You doesn't
Right.
have some time to use your thumb or something. There is
Right.
a way for people who couldn't lose their arm or legs
Right.
or whatever.
Right, exactly. There's more than one way to push a button. Each person who wants assisted suicide would be examined by 2 physicians, would have a
Real example.
Yeah, real physical exams, not just, talking to somebody over a computer. It would be a real physical exam. Have a psychosocial evaluation to screen out depression and demoralization, as well as abuse, coercion, financial pressure, and social pressure caused by lack of autonomy and control in the person's life.
And people who think there is no pressure to anybody are naive, because every week there is some case happening in the
You can find in the news,
caring
yeah.
home or different kind.
Right, exactly. This evaluation could also determine whether the person is, and this is language from the decision, vulnerable to inducement to commit suicide in a time of weakness. And according to the court decision, those people should not be allowed assisted suicide. So there needs to be an evaluation to decide if a person is vulnerable.
And if the evaluation is far away on a computer and you doesn't see the all-around thing, you couldn't do a good evaluation.
Right. That's what the psychosocial evaluation is to do, is to figure out if the person is vulnerable. And that takes things like a home visit to see how the things are working out at the person's home. The person, let's see, each person who wants assisted suicide would also get a palliative care consultation. And they would get peer counseling by a person living with a similar disability or disease.
A palliative care consultation?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, they guarantee you that you will die, but they don't guarantee you to have palliative care.
Right.
But if you do a real palliative care consultation, you may offer a solution about it.
Right. You're talking to a professional in palliative care who knows about pain relief, who knows how to do pain relief and the emotional issues that come with the end of life and how to deal with those. And a lot of proposals don't even require a palliative care consultation. That's why we're saying it's really important. And also peer counseling. So if you become disabled, you need to talk to somebody who lives with that disability in order to get a clear idea of what it's really like. You come down with ALS, and all you hear from is people who say, oh, it's such a tragedy. Then you get a chance to talk to somebody who has ALS, and they're living with a respirator, and they have a feeding tube, and they say, it took me a little while to get used to the respirator, but it's better to be able to breathe than to be dead. So that's why it's good to have a chance to have some peer counseling. And finally, you would work out an informed consent worksheet summarizing information about the medical condition, alternatives to assisted suicide like rehabilitation and palliative care and home-based services, what to expect from an assisted suicide and the pros and cons of assisted suicide.
Okay, pros and cons, because you could have good things happening and bad thing too.
Right.
You have to see both sides, not only one side.
Right, and a lot of people say, well, this is what I expect from assisted suicide, but they don't know that there could be complications. They don't know that, they say, oh, my family's all going to come around, but maybe their family won't all come around and be with them at the end of their lives. They
because
have this
it's very hard to
Yep.
see somebody die.
Right, and sometimes there's fighting in the family, and they have this idea that if they have an assisted suicide, everybody's going to make up and be happy together, but maybe that won't work. So people have to have a realistic understanding of what they're getting into. And also people say, well, I'll be able to see everybody after, they'll all be around my funeral and blah, blah, blah. People think they're going to sort of see everything after they're dead. They don't understand that being dead means
You're dead.
you're dead. You don't see anything afterwards. You're not there anymore.
Nobody, I came back from saying, okay, I saw that thing and that thing happened. Nobody
Right,
over
right,
many billions of people.
right. Unlike all other recommendations that we've seen, toujours vivant not to get calls for the process to be fully accessible to disabled people, including communications access.
I just want to see one guy or one person who is in favor of assisted suicide who will vote against this thing.
Right.
Because it's going to the both side and it's neutral, completely neutral.
Right. But
And it's
nobody ever
needed.
thinks about it. And it's funny because even proposals from disability groups sometimes don't put this stuff in, but it's absolutely essential if people with communication disabilities are going to be able to give informed consent. So we also stipulate a waiting period of 1 year following the onset of a permanent disability and at least 2 weeks for a disease which is likely to cause death in less than 6 months.
Okay, a reasonable time to take decision is needed, and we think that is reasonable. And if it's a really in a death situation, the people will be dying within 24 hours, something like that. Those things doesn't apply. It's already done that that doctor will give to certain patient enough morphine to kill themselves, and sometimes they go to the limit of their heart and die. But what they kill them, it's not the morphine itself. It's the end of their life. Okay, happening.
Right.
So it doesn't apply, but it's apply if you are asking for assisted suicide.
Right, and also if somebody becomes disabled, they need time to grieve what they're losing, and grief takes a long time, and people need to be able to have time to adjust as well.
And the prognostic of 6 months, sometimes people live 5 years, not for 6 months, even with a prognostic of 6 months.
Right, exactly. So that's why we're saying with an onset of a disability, they need 1 year, and if they have a prognosis, they need to at least wait a couple of weeks. The application and the assessments would be reviewed by an eligibility determination panel, which would decide whether the person is a competent adult resident of the province who has a grievous and irremediable medical condition that causes enduring suffering that is intolerable to the person in the circumstances of his or her condition. And that is language directly out of the court decision. So that's what the eligibility determination panel would have to do. And we described who would be on that panel. And it's, it would include a doctor and a palliative care person and a disability rights activist. And that panel is there to decide whether the person is eligible according to that eligibility criteria. And if the panel determines that the person is eligible, the file goes on to a judge who will decide
And
bunch of
judge
things.
is normally a neutral people
It's
from
supposed to be
anybody. It's supposed to be,
Right.
but normally it is of the environment of the people who asking for assisted suicide.
Right. Right. The judge is supposed to be neutral, and we know that a lot of judges have the same biases about disability as everybody else. But here's the things that the judge has to decide.
Yeah.
Whether the person is vulnerable under, whether they're vulnerable to inducement to commit suicide in a moment of weakness.
So even in the decision, it's not to be allowed to have assisted suicide.
Right. If that person is vulnerable for, all the reasons that we've talked about at other times, then the person wouldn't get assisted suicide. The judge needs to decide if the request is voluntary and if the person has given informed consent. Did the person get the information they needed to make a good decision?
Informed consent over all the things around, not
Right.
only the meaning of the people itself.
Right, not just the meaning of the law, but also what kind of services that they could get, whether they could get palliative care, all that stuff.
Yeah.
If the person's death would inflict undue suffering on another person or other people.
Nobody talk about it right now.
Right.
But it's very important because the grief or father or something could affect the people for many years if
Mhm.
it's a suicide. Sister, a father, or whatever, it could cause very heavy damage to the family sometimes.
Right, exactly. Also, the judge will decide if allowing assisted suicide is likely to subvert the public policy for suicide prevention, and that's important, like we talked about before. Would it violate the charter right to life or protections against discrimination on the basis of age, race, gender, or disability, or other protected status? And would it send the message that the lives of people with disabilities have less value than those of non-disabled people? And if the judge thinks that those things are the case, then he should not approve, or she should not approve the assisted suicide. So those are things that the judge would have to decide. The assisted suicide would be monitored by a specially trained technician. The person getting the assisted suicide would have the choice to swallow pills or a liquid, or to trigger an IV injection. The technician would set up the IV and oversee the process, including administering an antidote if the person changed his or her mind.
Yeah, it's supposed, and it is the law of Quebec, and it's supposed to be in the decision. If the people doesn't want to die anymore, they're supposed to be able to stop the process at any time.
Right. And, there may be a point after which, even if they gave the antidote, the person would die, but they still need to, the person needs to have the right to change their mind, even up to the end.
And this is a right.
Right. The case of the cause of death listed on the death certificate would be assisted suicide rather than whatever other condition the person has. Also, an autopsy would be performed in all cases of assisted suicide to verify the diagnosis, and the information would be added to the person's dossier.
And these informations are very, very important.
For a couple of reasons. One is we want to make sure that one particular doctor isn't always giving, assuming that the person has a terminal medical condition or a more severe diagnosis than they really have. And secondly, we want to make sure that doctors are making good diagnoses and that people are choosing to die from medical conditions that really are grievous and irremediable. Okay, an assisted suicide commission would be created under our program, and that would oversee all aspects of the assisted suicide program. It would collect, maintain, and study data and produce annual statistical reports.
collect and study, producing reports.
Right,
Those things are really, really, really important
right,
because at the end it will tell us.
right. It will tell us if the program is working properly or if we've gone down a slippery slope. And we can only know that by having information, by keeping the information, by doing statistical reports, and by doing analyses. And the information I had proposed would be kept for 50 years. Now, one other proposal that I saw would have the information kept for only 5 years.
And keeping it for 50 years look like, oh, it's a long time. But no, with computer, it's not a very hard job. It's not harder than to keep it from 5 years or 10 years or a week. It's the same job.
Right. And it only with that much information can you do a proper sociological or epidemiological study of what's going on. The commission would also study and report on the progress, strengths, and weaknesses of the program. And finally, it would conduct randomized studies to detect illegal ending of life practices. So we have no illusions that many or even any of our recommendations will be adopted by the committee. We're not fooling ourselves.
We don't fool ourselves.
Right.
We agree. Probably they will not even read properly our report.
Right. But we need to go on record. We felt it was urgent to put these ideas before the group to offer a balance to the meager proposals of assisted suicide advocates. So we felt it was very important to go on record for the historical record to say at least somebody said.
Yeah, and in 5 or 10 years we will say like what the name in the Simpsons?
We told you so. No, that's not nice to say. But.
No, but it's not a joke. Right. The thing it's very, very, very important because we play with the life and death of people, and we feel that the government doesn't understand the deepness of this things. They don't feel it properly. So we think they will do something bad, and they will have difficulty to correct it, and people who should not die will die.
Right.
And this is very important.
Right. So for more information and contact details, we were just talking about safeguards, and those are important, but one thing it's important to remember is that we oppose assisted suicide, and all the safeguards in the world are really not going to prevent people with disabilities from being wrongly killed, and we understand that. And there are reasons to oppose assisted suicide. Here are some of them. First, it's unnecessary because everyone has the option to commit suicide or to refuse medical care and to have palliative sedation on demand.
And we have proof of it.
We have interviews that talk about that. We have proof of that.
Yeah.
It's discriminatory because while people without disabilities receive suicide prevention services if they express a wish to die, people with disabilities will be encouraged and assisted to kill themselves. Also, choice is an illusion because the choice to die cannot be free as long as people with disabilities don't have the choice of where and how to live. And finally, safeguards don't work. Where these practices are legal, safeguards do not prevent people with disabilities from being wrongly killed.
If they accept everything we have said, there will still some people who should not die will die.
And even though people in Canada support the abolition of the death penalty because they don't want anybody who wasn't convicted of a crime to be killed, yet they still don't seem to be worried about people who would wrongly be killed under an assisted suicide bill.
Yes.
And that's too bad. To view our videos, go to YouTube and use the search engine of your choice and search for euthanasia and disability. Those two terms will bring up our videos. To participate live, send me your email address and I will send you a link to join us live, and that'll arrive about 15 minutes before the video. You can also check our Facebook page for the links, and I'll give you our email address in just a minute. For more information on the subjects we talk about here, go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. Go to our website at tvndy.ca. You can email me at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow me on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks for being with us, and please join us again next week. My name is Amy Hasbrook. Thanks to Christian DeBlay.
See you next week. Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.